Welcome to Discovering the Ancient Paths. I am Pastor Mark Biltz of El Shaddai Ministries. We meet every Saturday morning in Tacoma, Washington from 10 a.m. to 12:30. One of the most exciting things we do is to look at the New Testament through the lens of the culture during the very days of the Messiah. We also go through the Torah, or the first 5 books of Moses, throughout the entire year, dividing it into 52 sections, so over the year, all 5 books are covered. Remember after the resurrection, on the road to Emmaus, how the disciples' hearts were burning as Jesus opened up the Old Testament to them in ways they had never seen. That's what we do every week. Join us on the journey of your life right here at El Shaddai Ministries, meeting every Saturday morning right here in Tacoma, Washington from 10 a.m. to 12:30. We'll see you there. All right, Shabbat Shalom again, everyone. We're so glad you're with us. Today, the Torah portion is what? Korach. And this is from Numbers chapter 16, verse 1 through 18:32. And so Korah is who we're going to study about. And what do we find about Korah? He was very similar to Haman. I don't know how many of you that watched the Tammuz teaching on the new moon about the Haman principle. Haman was the type of guy who had everything, but he wasn't satisfied unless he could also have Mordecai bow. Everyone would bow to Mordecai or bow to Haman except Mordecai. And so how many know people that are just malcontents? They're never happy with what they have. They always want what the neighbor has as well. Got to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. And who else was like that had everything and yet wasn't happy? It was Adam and Eve in the garden. Adam and Eve had every tree except for one, and they had to have that one tree. Well, here we find Korah. Korah had the very high honored position to be the one to actually carry the Ark of the Covenant, and he wasn't happy. He wanted to be a priest. And so guess what? Moses says you're going down. And that's exactly what happened. Now, this is the month of Tammuz, which has to, again, to do with the tribe of Reuben. Sight what you see. And right after the sin of the spies, this same month, we now have the sin of Korah, who wasn't happy with what he saw. So we're going to start with number 16, verse 1 through 3. Here we see Korah was a son of a man who was named Izhar, who is the son of a man named Kohath, who was the son of someone named Levi. All right, well, wow, he is a Levite. But as you have to know, not very few of the Levites were ever priests. Only the sons of Aaron were priests. So 99% of the Levites were not priests. Okay, now let's take a look at this. There's these 2 other guys with him. One is named Dathan, and the other one is Abiram. They're the sons of Eliav. And then we have a guy named On, who is the son of Peleth, who are the sons of Reuben. And what does it say? They took men, and they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel. Look at this, 250 princes of the assembly. They are famous in the congregation, men of renown. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And look at what they said. You take too much upon you, seeing, there's your eyesight, seeing all the congregation are holy, every single one of them, and the Lord is among all of them. Why then do you lift yourself up above the congregation of the Lord? Wow, my goodness. How many of you know just because someone is famous doesn't make them right? How many Hollywood stars do we know that are famous, but they're not always right? How many famous politicians do we know, but they're not always right? And here they're saying, everybody is holy. Well, if everybody's holy, no one is holy, because then no one is set apart. So what is their motivation? Well, with everything, you want to find out their motivation. Well, overtly, it's everyone is holy. Covertly, it's kind of like communism. Really, everyone's the same. But also, I believe that Korah really wanted to be the leader. He wanted to be the boss. Okay? Now, let's look at Deuteronomy 14, 1 through 2 for a minute. We're going to bring this in. Who knows what Korah's name means? Anyone know what Korah's name means? It means to be bald. He must have been bald. Look at what it says. It says, you are the children of the Lord your God. You shall not cut yourselves nor make any baldness. Okay, there's his name right there. Between your eyes for the dead. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God, and the Lord has chosen you to be a people for his own possession above all the nations who are on the face of the earth. Okay, so now what happens if the nations say to Israel, who made you holier than everyone else? The whole world is holy. Well, now, wait a minute. God is the one who makes things holy to him, and he chose them. To me, this is almost like no borders. No borders. Everyone, is to have no borders. What did Korah wanted to do? He wanted to open the holy place and the Holy of Holies to everybody, as far as he was concerned, or only to himself. So what is he doing? He's blurring the borders between what is holy and what is profane. And what do we see happening in our society today? Korah was rebellious. Korah was lawless. And we're seeing today this blurring of borders between people, between the sexes, between everything. It's all about breaking down borders and blurring all the boundaries. Even between the temple and the camp, between the priesthood and the world outside. This actually, as you know, was a rebellion against Moses' leadership. It's not only a holy rebellion, but it's a rebellion against holiness. I believe this is the type of an Antichrist spirit that was coming from within the congregation. Okay, here's the whole thing. Remember in John, 1 John, he talked about the Antichrist that had come from within us. And I think it's the same thing within Christianity. People talk about the Antichrist being some kind of a pagan. I think he's going to be a professing Christian. And it's going to be a rebellion that rises up. Now, I want you to take a look here at this chart. I have the tent of meeting or Moses' tabernacle. Then in yellow, I have the Levites. There was Merari, Gershon, and Kohath. Now, Kohath, if you'll notice, under Kohath, he had 4 children. Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. That was their kids' names. Amram is the one who gives birth to Moses. Izhar gives birth to Korah. Uzziel gives birth to Elizaphan. All right? Well, Moses' brother was Aaron, and only Aaron could be a priest. That's why I have him on the east side. The rest of the Levites got to haul the tent around. Okay, but only Aaron could be the priest. Well, guess what happens? Korah is a first cousin to Moses, okay? Their dads are brothers. And so what Korah's upset about is not only did he not get to be the one in charge like Moses or Aaron, but guess what? Elizaphan was the one who got to be the head of all the Kohathites. So he also lost out there as well. So he feels like he didn't get a good position. Well, guess who was on the south side right next to Korah? None other than Reuben. And so this is why you have the problem with Reuben's congregation, because he lives next door, okay, to Korah. And Korah is sowing all these seeds, murmuring and complaining. Well, guess what? Dathan, Abiram, and On are all Reubenites. And that's why he grabs those guys. This is why we have to be so careful who we associate with. Do not associate yourself with whiners, complainers, malcontents. Don't allow them to be friends. I mean, there's different level of friendship. I tell people that my friends, with people, you can build a 1-lane bridge, a 2-lane bridge, or a 6-lane highway. So we have, with every relationship, it depends. Well, don't build 6-lane highways with a bunch of people who are whiners and complainers. Okay, so look what happens. In Numbers 16, 10 through 12, here Moses is speaking to the Levites. And he says, look, he has brought you near to him and all of your brothers, the sons of Levi, with you. And you seek the priesthood also? For which cause both you and all of your company, you're gathered against who? Against the Lord. And he says, and what is Aaron that you murmur against him? So Moses, he called Dathan and Abiram to come on up here. And what did they say? We're not coming up. Okay. And he says, okay, if you're not coming up, guess what? You're going down. That's basically what he said. Now look at this. This is amazing that Dathan and Abiram said this, because look at Numbers chapter 16:13. Here it says, is it a small thing that you brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, but you must also make yourself a prince over us? Okay, so Dathan and Abiram were both complaining to Moses that he's making himself a prince over them. You know what's fascinating? Look what happened a little earlier, like a year and a half earlier. Oh, actually, this was about 40 years earlier. Okay, look at Exodus 2:13 and 14. Remember when Moses goes out the second day and there's two men of the Hebrews that were fighting with each other? And Moses said to the one who did the wrong, why do you strike your fellow? And he said, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you know it is taught that it was Dathan and Abiram were the two that were fighting? These were the very two that were fighting, claiming Moses was trying to make him a prince or a judge over us. Okay, and we know he kills the Egyptian and he's off for 40 years. And now 41 years later, here they are again accusing him of wanting to be a prince and a judge over them. So anyway, we know Reuben was replaced as the firstborn, okay, because of what he did. Well, the right of the firstborn is paramount. Reuben was Leah's firstborn, okay? But now Rachel's firstborn, Joseph, receives the honor. And so the Reuben camp's not real happy, which is why they decide to side with Korah, because they had lost the right of the firstborn. Now, the 250 leaders from the other tribes, guess what? They all met their death as well when they brought these fire pans, okay? And they were all killed simply because they were influenced by disgruntled neighbors. Okay, this points to the awesome consequence that the influence of friends, neighbors, and the people that you associate with can have on you. All right, who do we surround ourselves with? Do we surround ourselves with negative people or with positive people? Do we surround ourselves with people who always murmur about leaders? Now, just who was Korah? Think about this for a minute. In light of what's happening today, especially in the chop zone, Chaz zone in Seattle, those of you that are familiar with that, one might say if God and Moses would have just appeased Korah, okay, and give him some important position, maybe he wouldn't be angry or rebellious and all this trouble could have been avoided and we could have peace. Well, Korah was actually rebelling against God. I mean, here in our Chaz zone, the mayor, the governor basically just saying, oh, just let them be, and no, you can't tolerate lawlessness. Okay, let's go to Numbers 16 and look at verse 4 through 7. What did Moses do when Korah, his first cousin, is rebelling? He hears it, he falls on his face, and then he speaks to Korah and all of his company saying, in the morning, the Lord will show who belongs to him and who is holy, and will cause him to come near to him. Even him whom he shall choose, he will cause to come near to him. And then Moses says this, fine, you take censers, Korah, and all of your company, put fire in them, put incense on them before the Lord tomorrow, and hey, draw near to God, go right ahead, and it'll be the man whom the Lord chooses, he'll be holy. You've gone too far, you sons of Levi. And so here he says, you think you can draw near to the Lord? Fine, get some incense, go draw near. Maybe you forgot what happened to Aaron's two sons. Okay, and look what happens. In verse 21 through 27 of Numbers 16, he says, separate yourselves from among this congregation that I may consume them in a moment. That's what God says. And so what did they do again? They fell on their faces. I think the humility of Aaron and Moses is just amazing to me. They weren't standing up and full of pride and ego, get them, God, get them, God. No, they're trying to intercede, which is really what the armor of God is all about again. It's the priestly garments. And they said, oh God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and will you be angry with everybody? And the Lord spoke to Moses saying, okay, fine, tell everybody to get out from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And so Moses, he gets up and he goes to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel are following Moses. And he speaks to all the congregation that is around them, saying, run for your lives. Okay, depart, I pray you, from the tents of these wicked men, and don't touch anything of theirs, lest you be consumed in all their sins. So guess what? Everybody gets up from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan and Abiram on every side. And then here Dathan and Abiram come out and stood in the door of their tents. Who else is with them? Their wives, their sons, their little children. Now, wait a minute. Who's missing here? There were three people we read. It was Dathan, Abiram, and someone named On, the son of Peleth. Well, how come On's not mentioned here? How come it's just Dathan and Abiram? Where did On go? What happened to him? It is taught that his wife spoke to him a little word or two, and so he repented. Okay, and so it's a good thing, that On's wife took charge there. And so let's look at what happens in Numbers 16, verse 30 and 31. Moses says, if the Lord makes a new thing, this means something that hasn't happened before, and the earth opens up her mouth and swallows them up with everything that pertains to them, and they go down how? Alive into the pit. Moses says, then you're going to understand that these people provoked the Lord. And it came to pass, as soon as he was done speaking, the ground clave asunder that was under them. Can you imagine being able to predict an earthquake? Not only the time, but where it's going to happen. All right? And look at this. Numbers 16, 33 through 35. They and everything that pertained to them went down how? Alive into the pit, and then the earth closed. Now, it's one thing, we're used to earthquakes that's open up and swallows everything, but how many of us see it close again after it's been swallowed? All right, so this is like a mouth that opens, lets everybody in, and it just consumes them, and it shuts its mouth again. And here they go alive into the pit, and then it says they perished among the congregation, and all of Israel who were round about them fled at the cry of them, for they were afraid the earth was going to swallow them up also. And then comes a fire out from the Lord, and it consumes the 250 men that were offering incense. You know what? There's only one other time we hear about the earth opening up and swallowing someone alive. Where is that found? Where else do we find the earth opening up and swallowing someone alive? It's in the book of Revelation. Let's go to 19, verse 20. Here the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that was working miracles before him, with which he deceived those that had received the mark of the beast, those that worshipped his image. And both of these guys were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone. Oh my goodness. See, Korah is a type of Antichrist. That's why we see this happening. So here we have the beast and the false prophet and Korah's group. They are the only recorded occurrences of individuals descending into the pit without first experiencing a physical death. So what does Korah do? Korah helps us understand the nature and character of the Antichrist. All right? The Antichrist wants to establish his own authority, just like Korah wanted to establish his own authority. He wanted to have his own commandments, his own anointing, his own religious practices. The similarities that exist between Korah's rebellion and the Antichrist rebellion are amazing. So by studying Korah, we can also see how the Antichrist wants to manipulate people and come to power. How many of you know a lot of it is about control and power? What do the politicians want? They want control and power. That's really what it is all about. Right before during the Exodus, that generation where all the miracles occurred, God says that generation that had all the miracles was a generation of no faith. And Yeshua's generation, with all these miracles, with him right here on earth, he said his generation is a generation of no faith. And then Yeshua prophesies about his return, and he's questioning, will this generation also be one of no faith? All right? So there's a lot of similarities here. Korah, listen to this. Korah is claiming that God's divine election, in other words, God's pick, didn't take place at all, and Moses and Aaron really were self-appointing themselves as leaders. So what is Korah actually doing? Korah, okay, he's not only undermining Moses, but also the entire Torah that was received at Sinai, that was given to Moses. He's saying God did not even do any of it. He wasn't involved. Now, listen to this. If Moses merely was exalting himself, then his claim to speak for God is invalid, and the Torah becomes just a human document. And if all the people are equally holy, then anyone and everyone can also produce a book that's equal in quality to the Torah. I don't think so. Okay? Korah not only challenges the authority of Moses, the authority of Torah, and the sovereignty of God. And you know what that sounds a lot like to me? Replacement theology. That's what replacement theology is. You're saying God didn't pick you, or if he did, he changed his mind. So I believe replacement theology is much along the line of Korah, rebellion. So look at Numbers 16, verse 41. On the next day, now think about this. Here, it's the very next day. So here we have one day. What happens? Korah, Dathan, Abiram, this giant miraculous earthquake opens up, swallows them all. A fire comes out from the Lord and destroys all these famous people. And look what happens. Number 16:41, the next day, the congregation of the children of Israel, they're murmuring against Moses and against Aaron, saying, you killed the Lord's people. Moses and Aaron says, we don't control an earthquake. The fire didn't come out from us. What are you talking about? Okay, so what happens? The Lord tells Moses in Numbers 16:44 through 48, get away from these people. I'm going to consume them in a moment. And so what do? They fall on their faces again. I'm surprised they didn't have a broken nose by now. Moses said to Aaron, quick, get your censer, put fire from the altar and lay incense on it, and quickly carry it into the congregation and make atonement, because the Lord is angry. The plague has begun. And so Aaron does as Moses said, ran into the midst of the assembly, and the plague had already begun among the people, and he had put the incense and he made atonement, and then he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stayed. Wow. Wow, isn't that interesting? And look at this. In Numbers 16:49, those that died in the plague were 14,700. Besides those that died in the matter of Korah. That's a lot of people. So let's look at Numbers 17, verse 12 and 13. So now the children of Israel speak to Moses. We're dying. We're all perishing. Whoever comes anywhere near this tabernacle is going to die. Are we going to be consumed with dying? I mean, talk about malcontents. They murmur and complain, and they murmur and complain. And now for them, being anywhere near the Lord speaks of death. And it's supposed to be all about life. But this is why it's so important that when we draw near to the Lord, as the New Testament says, we still have to draw near with protocol. Okay, we have to make sure we're right when we draw near. No murmuring and complaining. So let's look at Numbers 17, verse 8 through 10. It comes to pass that on the morrow, Moses goes into the tabernacle. This is after they had the 12 rods. They wanted to find out, okay, whose rod is going to blossom and bud. And we see the rod of Aaron for the house of Levi was budded, brought forth buds and bloomed blossoms and yielded almonds. Can you imagine breaking off a branch off of a tree and then expecting a dead branch to all of a sudden produce fruit? That is crazy. But that's what happened. And so Moses brought out all the rods from before the Lord to all the children of Israel. And what did they do? They looked, again, sight. And every man took his rod. And the Lord said to Moses, bring Aaron's rod again back to the ark of the testimony. And I want it to be kept there for a token against who? The rebels. All right. So God has Aaron's rod that budded. The whole purpose was to be a reminder to those who are rebellious. And then he says, and you shall quite take away their murmurings from me that they don't die. Do you realize if you're murmuring and complaining in God's presence, it's going to lead to death? Okay. So let's look at Numbers 26:11. This is one of the most amazing verses in the whole Bible. Remember Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Reuben, their whole family, wives, children, everyone died? What about Korah? What happened to Korah's family? Did his whole family die? No. Guess what? His whole family abandoned Dad and said, we're out of here. And only Korah died. His wife and kids, they said, we are out of here. And look at this. Numbers 26:11, notwithstanding the children of Korah died not. So Korah's descendants managed to break away from the generational curse of jealousy, bitterness. Do you know, if you go and you read the book of Songs, there are 11 psalms specifically written by the children of Korah. Wow, that is huge. Now, Korah was a Levite, right? But could he become a priest? He couldn't become a priest because he wasn't a son of Aaron. So my question to you is, did any of Korah's descendants ever become a priest? Yes. Who? Samuel the prophet. Samuel the prophet was a son of Korah. Isn't that crazy? Okay, well, let's go and look at 1 Samuel 11, verse 14 and 15. I think this is fascinating that this is part of the Haftorah. And remember, this is 500 years later. 500 years later. Samuel says to the people, come, let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there. So all the people go to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord, and there they sacrificed peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel greatly rejoiced. Okay, so what happens? Saul is king. Now, look at the next chapter 12, 1 Samuel 12, 1 and 2. God was upset that Israel wanted a king like all the nations. He was to be their king. But look what happened. Samuel says to all of Israel in 1 Samuel 12, behold, I have obeyed your voice in all that you have said to me, and I made a king over you. And now, behold, the king walks before you. I am old and gray, and behold, my sons are with you. Now look at verse 12 and 13. And when you saw that Nahash, the king of the children of Ammon, came against you, you said to me, no, we want a king to reign over us, when the Lord your God was supposed to be your king. So now, therefore, behold the king whom you've chosen and whom you've desired, and behold, the Lord has set a king over you. They asked for a king, and they got one. And guess what King Saul's name means? Saul means to ask for. So they literally asked for a king, and he gave them asked. Isn't that fascinating? Well, now look what happens in 1 Samuel 12, 16 and 17. Now, therefore, stand and see this great thing which the Lord is going to do before your eyes. Sight. Is it not when? The wheat harvest today. This is Pentecost, Shabbat. Can you imagine? It was on Shabbat they declared God as their king on Mount Sinai. And it's like they take the wedding ring off. And what do? They want to give it to someone else on the wedding day. 500 years later, at Shabbat, they say, we don't want God as our king anymore. We want a king like all the nations. What an insult. On the very day they accepted God as their king and entered the covenant, the very same day they throw God off and they want to have a king like all the nations. That is amazing. I will call to the Lord, he says, and he's going to send you thunder and rain that you may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord in asking for a king. Now, what I think is so ironic and poetic is that God would use a descendant of Korah, Samuel, to speak this against them. Here, Samuel's one who's defending the covenant relationship between God and the people through God's Moses servant. So here now, 500 years later, it's the son of Korah who's rebuking Israel for being rebellious against God. Only God could do this. Look at 1 Samuel 13:1. Now here's where it gets very interesting. How long did Saul reign here, it says? Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years, okay, so this is now, Saul has 2 years as a king under his belt, right? Let's look at verse 5. Here comes the Philistines. They gather themselves together to fight with Israel. They have 30,000 chariots. Can you imagine? 30,000 chariots. 6,000 horsemen. And people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. So they're about to attack a huge contingent of Philistines about to attack Saul after only 2 years of reigning. So look what happens in verse 7 through 11 of 1 Samuel 13. Some of the Hebrews go over the Jordan to the land of Gad. Okay, they're leaving the promised land. They're going over to the other side of the Jordan. As for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people followed him scared to death. And he waits 7 days according to the set time that Samuel had appointed, but Samuel didn't come. And the people were scattering. And Saul said, "Bring here a burnt offering to me and peace offerings." And Saul offered the burnt offering. And it came to pass, as soon as he had done making an end of the offering, the burnt offering, behold, here comes Samuel. Saul goes out to meet him, that he might salute him. And Samuel says, "What have you done?" And Saul said, "Well, because I saw the people were scattering from me, and you didn't come within the day appointed." Here he is, whining and complaining. Look at verse 13 and 14. Samuel says to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom upon Israel forever. But now your kingdom is not going to continue. The Lord is looking for someone after his own heart. And the Lord has commanded him to be captain over his people, because you have not kept that which the Lord commanded you." Wow. See, here's the problem. It goes back to Korah wanted to be something he's not. Well, Saul, because of fear of the enemy, he decides to do the work of the priest when he's king. And the king and the priest had separate roles. Okay, and he, just like Korah, he wanted to be the priest. Well, look at 1 Samuel 14, the next chapter, 35. And Saul built an altar to the Lord. The same was the first altar that he built to the Lord. Wow. Here he's king for several years and never even builds an altar to the Lord. It's only after this battle that he finally decides, after he's already lost the kingship. If you remember last week's Torah portion, I think it was, God told the spies to let's go take the land. They bring the bad report. We're not going to go up. And then the next day they say, "Okay, we'll obey and we'll go up." And it's like, too late. There's a set time for these things. Well, it's the same thing here. Saul, he finally decides, "Okay, I'm going to build an altar and worship God." Well, guess what? Too late. Too late. Look at verse 37. It says, Saul asked the counsel of God. "Shall I go down to the Philistines? Will you deliver them into the hand of Israel?" But guess what? God never answered him. Wow. Wow. That to me is amazing. This goes back again. We are not the boss. We can't seek God when we feel like it. We need to seek him at appointed times. God gives us a set time to appoint. And if we go ahead and act rashly and think we're going to do whatever we want to do, I'm just going to carry this Jesus in my pocket and I'll pull him out when I need him. I need Jesus to help me here, and Jesus, you help me here. But when God calls you, you don't answer him. What makes you think he's going to answer you when you call? This is why we have to understand the appointed times. This is why we have to respond when God calls. And we have to understand the protocols. This is why we need to get on God's calendar. Speaking of God's calendar, we've got God's calendar right here. And I highly recommend people get on his calendar, especially the times of chaos and darkness are coming. If you want to be unlike Korah, unlike Saul, and you want to seek God, know the appointed times. That's why we have this calendar. It's good from this coming September all the way to 2022. How many of you know that God always has equal weights and measures? And how many of you know, like a knife can kill you or save your life? If it's a surgeon taking your appendix out, that's a good thing. If it's the bad guy, that's the bad thing. But there's two sides to every coin, right? Well, one thing that was interesting is when you look at Nehemiah, chapter 4 and verse 3, it talks about a man whose name was Tobiah, who was an Ammonite, okay? Now, this Tobiah is a bad guy, right? But what does Tobiah mean in Hebrew? God is good, basically. And what was Moses' name, more than likely, that his mother gave him? Tobiah. Well, from a math point of view, he said, look at this. The word for life, chai, equals 18. And the word for sin, kata, also equals 18. So it's like God sets before you life and death. Okay, it's your choice. Do you want to live or do you want to die, have a life of sin? And I thought, well, that was interesting. And then concerning equal mathematical numbers, take a look at this with Genesis compared to Nehemiah. When you look at the math of these two verses, in Genesis 35:12, God is saying that the land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, I will give it to you, and to your seed after you will I give the land. So this is God's promise to Jacob that he's going to give the land. Well, guess what? The numerical value in Hebrew of that verse is 4,862. We'll look at Nehemiah in our book, chapter 1, verse 8. It says, remember the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the people. Well, isn't that interesting? That also equals 4,862. So here you have the same numerical value. One says, I will gather you. One says, I will scatter you. If you obey or if you disobey, like Deuteronomy 30, God sets before us a blessing and a curse, life and death. It is our choice. Now, the other thing that he brought, my friend, brought up, I will show you here in just a minute. Let me see where I'm at. Okay, look at Nehemiah. Oh, I didn't put this one on a PowerPoint, so I'll just tell it to you. In Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 10, it says, they are your servants and your people whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. Okay, that's Nehemiah 1:10, talking about Israel, whom God has redeemed by his great power and his strong hand. Well, that equals 1,553. Well, guess what? In 2 Samuel 22:33, it says, God is my strength and power, and he makes my way perfect. That also is 1,553. So it's just kind of fascinating. Not only can you compare words to words, but verses to verses, and it gets quite interesting. Well, let's jump into Nehemiah chapter 6, and let's look at verse 1 and 2. It says, it came to pass when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab and the rest of our enemies heard that I had built the wall, and there was no breach left, though at this time I had not set up the doors upon the gate. So imagine this, the walls are fixed, but the doors are wide open. The doors haven't been built yet, so you can still come through the doorways. He says, Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, come, let us meet together in some one of the villages in the plain of Ono. And he said, oh no, I'm not going to do that. But they thought to do me mischief. Nehemiah says, man, they want to come meet me. How often do you need to know when someone asks you to meet them, you got to find out what is the purpose of this meeting. Okay. So let's look at verse 3 and 4 of Nehemiah 6. So he sends messengers back to them. And what are they doing? They're saying this. So Nehemiah told them to say, I'm doing a great work so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease when I leave it and come down to see you? Yet they sent unto me 4 times after this sort, and I answered them after the same manner. 4 times they kept saying, come over and meet us. And he says, no, I'm too busy. I'm doing stuff important. As a matter of fact, in verse 5, it says, then Sanballat sent his servants to me a 5th time. Oh my goodness, this is crazy. Well, guess what? I just want to show you this. This is kind of a interesting thing. Here is, wow. Let me show you this, and I'll have to show you the light in just the PowerPoint in just a minute. The same person that showed me this gematria equals also showed me this about this particular verse, and he wanted me to share this with you. So I'm going to share this with you too. Look at this. In Nehemiah 6:3, and look at verse 4. When it says, yet they sent unto me 4 times after this sort, I answered them after the same manner. Well, here's what is interesting. In Nehemiah 6:4, let me just go ahead and bring it up. That equals 2,166. That's the gematria. Well, here he kept sending servants to them saying something. Well, the Hebrew word to say is amar. And amar, that Hebrew word is 241. Resh is 2, mem is 40, aleph is 1. And he said to me, well, guess what? You take 2166 divided by 241, you get 8.987551867219917. Okay? Well, that's a pretty big number. And then my friend said, well, guess what? If you take the square root of that times 10 to the 8th, you get the speed of light in meters per second. God is light. God reacts at the speed of light. And here he's being harassed these 5 times. And he thought that it was interesting that, wow, look at this. God is light. He reacts at the speed of light. And so here he's answering Nehemiah's thing. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And look, it's only off like, this is if you had a piece of paper, cut it into 300 million pieces, only one little piece is all you're missing, because it's the speed of light is 299,792,459. Or that's what this equation equals. But the speed of light ends in an 8. But it's like, look how close this is to the speed of light, which I thought was quite fascinating. So anyway, here, that only God could do something like that. Okay, so now in Nehemiah 6, 5 through 7, get a load of this. Sanballat sent his servant to me a 5th time with an open letter in his hand, and in it these words were recorded. It is said, now here's what Sanballat's trying to say versus what Nehemiah was saying. Look at the lie. How many of you have you ever heard of fake news? Listen to what this says. Sanballat's letter said this. It is said among the nations, and even Geshem says so, that you Jews are hoping to make yourselves free from the king's authority, and that this is why you're building the wall. And they say that it is your purpose to be their king, Mr. Nehemiah. So isn't that fascinating? Again, you have a wall. There's 2 ways you can look at it. Okay, the wall is good or the wall is bad. That's the perspective. Borders, are borders good or bad? It depends on your perspective. Here they're saying, they're trying to read the motivation behind Nehemiah because he wants to be king. That's not what he wanted at all. And he also says that you have prophets preaching about you in Jerusalem and saying there's a king in Judah. Now on account of these things, will be sent to the king. So come now and let's have this little discussion. Wow, well now you find out what their motivation is. And so listen to what he does in verse 8 and 9. Then I sent to him saying, no such thing as you say are being done. They are only fiction that you've made up yourself. But look, now here's the key. Here's the key. They were hoping to put fear in us, saying their hands will become feeble and give up the work so that it may not get done. But now, oh God, make my hands strong. How many of you know today there are some people who mostly want to put fear in you? That's what it is. It's all about fear. Okay? And they'll say things. Well, look at Nehemiah 6, 10 through 12. He says, I went to the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabel, who was shut up, and he said, let us have a meeting in the house of God inside the temple, and let the doors be shut, for they will come to put you to death. Truly in the night they're going to come to put you to death. And Nehemiah says, am I the sort of man who's going to go and run away from something in flight? What man, he says, in my position would go into the temple to keep himself safe? I'm not going in. And then it became, it's almost like he's saying to go into the Holy of Holies. And Nehemiah says, I'm not a priest, I'm not a king, I can't go in there. I've got to obey God, not man. And then he says, it became clear to me then that God had not sent this guy. He had given this word of a prophet against me himself. And Tobiah and Sanballat had given him even money to come and do it. So here's the problem. It's within the government. There are people trying to be subversive, okay? And they're being paid money. How many of you, have heard of something like that ever happen? What do they call, lobbyist or something like that? Okay, well, let's look on. Nehemiah 6, 13 and 14. For this reason, they had given him money in order that I might be what? Overcome by fear and do what he said and do wrong. And so they would have a reason to say something evil about me and put shame on me. And then he says, keep in mind, oh my God, Tobiah and Sanballat and what they did, and Noadiah, the woman prophet, and the rest of the prophets whose purpose was what? To put fear in me. Are you hearing this over and over and over? So let's look at Nehemiah 6. This is verse 15 and 16. So the wall was complete on what day? It was complete on the 25th day of the month of what? Elul. In 52 days. Who knows what is important about the 25th day of Elul? Does anyone know what is important about the 25th day of Elul? What is so significant? Well, if you go to Genesis 1:3, God said, let there be light, and there was light. That happened on the 25th of Elul. Because 6 days later is Rosh Hashanah, when man was created on the 6th day. So I find it very fascinating that the very day in history that God spoke creation into existence, saying, let there be light, is the same day the walls are finished as well, stopping the tohu and the bohu, the chaos that was going on around them. And then look at this. And when our haters had news of this, all the nations around about us, they were the ones who were full of fear. Wahoo! And they were greatly ashamed, for they saw that this work had been done by our God. Isn't that amazing? Only God could say, let there be light. God is light. As a matter of fact, I think it's in either Psalms or Proverbs where it says the entrance of your words is light. That's why the first thing God spoke was let there be light, because he is light. And this is why he operates at the speed of light when it has to do with his. And this work of Nehemiah in building the wall is the work of God who operates at the speed of light in answer to our prayers. Okay, now, in case you're wondering, Elul 25 is September 14th this year. If you want to mark it on your calendar, you write down September 14th. And as a matter of fact, guess what? I have a calendar right here. September 14th, Elul 25. Genesis 1:1 is written on there. Hello? If you want to know when God spoke that verse, get the calendar. Okay. This is why it's so important to be on God's calendar. All right, so now let's see. Nehemiah 6:17 through 19. Okay, watch this. And further, in those days, the chiefs of Judah sent a number of letters to Tobiah. So now they're sending him letters, and his letters came to them. For in Judah, it says there were a number of people who had made an agreement by oath with him. Can you imagine? Subversion again. Within Judah, there are people who are aligning themselves with the enemy. They were a country divided. Because, why? Why did they enter an oath with him? Because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Erah. And his son, Yehohanan, had taken as his wife the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah. Oh my gosh, there's all this intermarriage problem. Remember, Sanballat is related to the high priest. Tobiah is related to the high priest. Okay, this was the big problem, which again goes back why in the Brit Hadashah, God says, don't be unequally yoked together with an unbeliever. It causes problems. And they said much before me of the good he had done and gave him accounts of my word. And look at this. Tobiah sent letters with the purpose of what? There it is again. This whole chapter is about causing fear. And everything they can do to cause fear. And we know fear can grip people where they can't move. They don't know what to do. And I've had to deal with fear. I've had to overcome fear. Like I said, I've had guns at my head twice. People wanted to kill me. I've been in all kinds of major car wrecks and everything else. And after a while, you learn how to deal with fear. You trust in the Lord, believe me. But that's what the enemy wants to do. He wants to cause fear. Okay, so look at Nehemiah 7. We're now in Nehemiah chapter 7. Let's look at verse 1 and 2. Now, when the building of the wall was complete, and I had put up the doors, now he's even got the doors up, And the doorkeepers and the music makers and the Levites have been given their places. I made my brother Hanani and Hananiah, the ruler of the tower, responsible for the government in Jerusalem, for he was a man of good faith. And who does he fear the most? He fears God the most. Okay, so this whole section, Nehemiah 6 and Nehemiah 7, is all about who are we going to fear, especially when we're doing important work for God. How many of you feel like the work of God is important? And if God is asking you to do it, and you're trying to do this great important work, how many of you know everyone's going to come against you? And so you have to expect that. But we have to fear God and not man. Man, he fears God more than most people were fearing God. He has the proper attitude. So let's look at Nehemiah 7, verse 3 and 4. And I said to them, do not let the doors of Jerusalem be open until the sun is high. Okay? And while the watchmen are in their places, let the doors be shut and locked. And let the people of Jerusalem be put on watch, everyone in his watch opposite his house. Now the town, it says, was wide and great, but the people in it were only a small number, and the houses hadn't even been put up yet. So now look at Nehemiah 7, 5 through 7. Let's watch what happens as this unfolds. God, my God, put it into my heart to get together the rulers and the chiefs and the people so they might be listed by families. In other words, I think what he wants to do is sort out the good from the bad in one sense. Let's see what we got here. And I came across a record, he says, of the names of those who came up at the first. And in it I saw these words. These are the people of the divisions of the kingdom among those who had been made prisoners by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and taken away by him, who went back to Jerusalem and Judah, everyone to his town, who came with Zerubbabel. So here he's quoting Ezra, again, the list of all of those who came back. And so let's go now to Nehemiah 7, 61 through 64. Here's what he's reading. He found what Ezra wrote. And it says, all of these were the people who went up from Tel Melah, Tel Harsha, all these other guys. But look at this. But because they had no knowledge of their fathers' families or offspring, it wasn't certain if they were even Israelites. And then there was the children of Delaiah, the children of Tobiah, the children of Nekodah. Look at this, 642 people. And then read this. And of the priests. There was these children of Hobaiah, the children of Hakos, the children of Barzillai. It looks like Godzilla, but it's Barzilla or something. Who was married to one of the daughters of Barzillai the Gileadite and took their name. And they made search for their record among the list of families, but their names were nowhere to be seen, so they were looked on as unclean and no longer priests. Here's all these people that were operating as priests that had intermarried with the heathen, and yet we find out that, why are these people operating as priests? They're not even legitimate priests. Remember Korah? Let's go back. Korah is a Levite. He's Moses' first cousin, and he wasn't allowed to be a priest. Things had gotten so bad, they're allowing all kinds of intermarriage and people who aren't even Jews or Israelis to be a priest. That's how bad it had gotten. Okay? Now, does anyone remember who Barzillai the Gileadite was? Does that name ring a bell to anybody? Oh, yeah, I remember Barzillai. All right. Israel had intermarried with his family. Isn't that what it says? Barzillai was from 500 years earlier. So they have been intermarrying with his family for 500 years. Okay? Now, that's had a huge effect on Israel. So, I'm going to take a moment. We're going to do a little rabbit trail, and I'm going to tell you about Barzillai. Was he a good guy or a bad guy? Let's look and see. We're going to go back to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel. We had talked about him earlier today. 1 Samuel 10:21. Then he made the tribe of Benjamin come near by families. And the family of the Matrites was taken. And from them, who is there? Saul, the son of Kish. So we see Saul's a Benjamite. He's the son of Kish. And we know he ended up becoming king. That's 1 Samuel 10. So Saul is king. Let's jump to 2 Samuel 2. We see Saul is no longer going to be king, but David is anointed as king in 2 Samuel 2. Now we also know in the story that David, after he's king, ends up running away from Absalom. His own son is trying to kill him. Does everyone remember Absalom, his son wanting to kill him? Okay, well, what happens, David ends up grabbing the Ark of the Covenant, leaving the Temple Mount, taking the Ark of the Covenant over to the Mount of Olives, and he's going up the Mount of Olives with the Ark of the Covenant, and then he stops, and he tells the priest to take the Ark of Covenant back to the temple, and he's going to go ahead and go on up to the top of the Mount of Olives. And so we see in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 29 and 30, Zadok and Abiathar, who are the priests, took the ark of God back to Jerusalem and did not go away from there. So they were on the run. They decided to stay. And what does David do? He goes up the slopes of the Mount of Olives, weeping all the way with his head covered, no shoes on his feet, and all the people who were with him covering their heads went up weeping. They're all weeping because David's son wants to kill him. He's not going to be king. And I think David is a type of Messiah. Isn't it interesting? He's at the top of the Mount of Olives weeping, looking over Jerusalem. Very fascinating. Okay, now let's go to the next chapter in 2 Samuel 16, 5 through 8. When King David came to Bahurim, which is at the top of the Mount of Olives, and then going just a short ways, there was a man of Saul's family. Okay, what is going on here? Remember, Saul was king, and now David is king. And there's a member of Saul's family who probably thought he should have been king after Saul, okay, or his lineage. But to save time, I'm going to tell you some of the things that happened. Do you remember who the Gibeonites were? Okay, the Gibeonites, 500 years earlier, after Joshua entered the promised land, God said, make no covenant with any of the Canaanites. Well, these Gibeonites put on these clothing like they were from far away, and they came up and said, we be from far away, make a covenant with us. So he does, and then he finds out they tricked him. He was really from the area. And so they were not to kill the Gibeonites. They made a covenant and an oath, it says. Well, guess what? In Saul's zeal, he killed a bunch of the Gibeonites. Not good. Even though it's 500 years later, he broke the covenant. And so that's why God called Saul a bloody man. And that's also a reason why he took the kingship from him, because of that as well. Well, then David had made an oath to Saul when Saul knew he was going to be king that he would not kill any of Saul's sons. Well, guess what? Now the Gibeonites, God says to David, guess what? The reason you're losing in your battle is because of what Saul did to the Gibeonites and killing them. You got to make that right. So David goes to the Gibeonites and says, how do I make this right? And they say, we want to kill 7 of Saul's sons. Thank you for joining with us. We hope you learned something new today. Please partner with us in fulfilling the scriptures about taking God's Torah to the nations. You can watch this whole program for free, along with all of our other archive programs right from our website link shown below. We hope to see you soon at our location right here in Tacoma, Washington. See you soon.